The moment I realized my own family had decided I no longer belonged in my own home. The sun was setting behind the street I had lived on for 28 years. My suitcase rolled behind me across the pavement as I walked toward the front door. Nothing about that evening seemed unusual at the beginning. The same quiet neighborhood. The same garden I planted with my own hands. The same porch light glowing softly near the entrance. Then my key stopped halfway inside the lock. I tried again. The metal refused to turn. For a few seconds I stood there staring at the door, as if the wood itself might explain what was happening. I checked the key. It was the same key I had used for years. I pushed harder. The lock did not move. That was when the door suddenly opened from the inside. My daughter-in-law stood there with her arms folded across her chest. Her expression looked strangely calm. Too calm. Behind her, I could see the living room. My living room. Except something about the scene felt wrong. My photographs were gone from the walls. The couch had been moved. Even the curtains were different. Then she spoke. "You should not be trying to get inside." Her voice sounded polite in a way that made the words colder. For a moment I thought this was some kind of misunderstanding. "I think the lock is broken," I said. She shook her head slowly. "The lock is not broken." She stepped aside slightly, and I noticed something behind her on the hallway floor. 2 large trash bags, filled with clothes. My clothes. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" I asked. Her answer arrived without hesitation. "We changed the locks this morning." The sentence felt unreal. I waited for her to explain. She did not. "So you are joking?" I said. "No." Still calm. Still cold. "You are not living here anymore." The words landed like a hammer against my chest. I looked past her again toward the living room. My bookshelf was empty. My late spouse's photograph was gone from the mantel. Everything that belonged to me had disappeared. I tried to step inside. She blocked the doorway immediately. "You should not do that." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "This is my house." She gave a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Actually, it is my husband's house now." My mind struggled to follow her logic. "My son lives here with you," she continued. "So the house belongs to us." For a few seconds I could not respond. The confidence in her voice made it sound as if she believed every word. Then another voice came from deeper inside the house. "My son, I told you it would be better to explain things calmly." He walked toward the door. The same child I had carried through fevers and school failures now looked at me with the distance of a stranger. "I think it is time we move forward," he said. "Move forward." Those words echoed strangely in my ears. Move forward from what? I asked. From the moment he married her. From the moment I noticed the quiet way she began rearranging control over every small decision in his life. Now the control had reached my front door. "You cannot just throw me out," I said. He sighed. "We talked about this before." "No, you talked." I listened. The daughter-in-law leaned against the doorframe as if she had already won the conversation. "You should not make this harder," she said. "We packed your things. They are outside." That was when I noticed the 2 suitcases sitting beside the porch steps. My belongings placed on the street like unwanted trash. Neighbors had begun slowing their cars as they passed. Humiliation burned across my face. "You are serious," I said quietly. My son looked away. "This house is too big for one person anyway." I studied both of them carefully. Something inside me began to shift. Anger would have been easy. Shouting would have been easy. Instead, I felt something colder rising inside my chest. Something steady. "You believe this house belongs to you," I said. My daughter-in-law nodded. "That is right. And you believe I have no right to live here." "That is also right." She spoke with absolute certainty. That certainty almost made me laugh. Because there was one small detail she clearly did not know. A detail that had been written in legal ink 28 years earlier. I stepped back from the doorway. "If that is what you want," I said calmly. Relief crossed her face. She thought the argument was finished. My son seemed surprised by how quickly I stopped resisting. "What will you do?" he asked. I picked up my suitcase. "I will leave." My daughter-in-law closed the door immediately. The sound of the new lock sliding into place echoed across the porch. For several seconds I stood there looking at the house I built from the ground up. The same house they believed they had taken from me. The truth was far more complicated. Because that building was never transferred to anyone. Not even to my own child. And the name written across the property deed was still mine. They had locked me out of my own house. But they had also just handed me the strongest legal case of my entire life. I walked down the driveway slowly while the evening grew darker. Behind me, my daughter-in-law probably believed she had won. What she did not realize yet was that her decision had just triggered something far bigger than a family argument. By the time the courts finished examining the documents tied to that house, the people inside would wish they had never touched the locks at all. And the next morning, the first phone call I made would begin the fight that none of them were prepared for. The night I stood outside my own house with 2 suitcases, I did not argue again. Arguing with people who already decided you are powerless never changes anything. I walked to the end of the street and sat on a wooden bench near the bus stop. Cars passed. Streetlights flickered on one by one. My house remained visible from that bench. The porch light glowed warmly, as if nothing had happened inside. Yet I knew every corner of that place had just been taken over by people who believed I had no right to return. My daughter-in-law probably felt proud of what she had done. My son probably convinced himself this was necessary. That thought hurt more than the locked door. 55 years of life had taught me one simple lesson. People reveal their real character when they believe you have lost control. I opened my phone and stared at the screen for a moment. There was one number I had saved many years earlier but never expected to use. A lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who specialized in property disputes. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice. A calm voice answered. "Good evening. I hope I am not calling too late," I said. "That depends on the problem." I looked once more toward the house at the end of the street. My family just locked me out of my own property. There was a short silence. Then the lawyer asked a question that told me immediately this person understood the situation. "Whose name is written on the deed?" "My name only." Another pause. This one felt heavier. "Then your family made a serious mistake." I leaned back against the bench. I thought the same thing. The lawyer asked several questions quickly. When was the property purchased? Who signed the documents? Was the ownership ever transferred? Every answer stayed the same. My name. Only mine. After a few minutes, the lawyer spoke again. "You should not confront them tonight." I was not planning to. Good. Because what they did may fall under illegal eviction. The words sounded cold and precise. Illegal eviction. I repeated them slowly in my mind. That means they broke the law by locking me out. Yes. If the property legally belongs to you. It does. Then they removed the legal owner from the property. A strange calm spread through my chest. Not relief. Something closer to clarity. For hours, my daughter-in-law probably celebrated what she believed was a victory. She probably believed the story ended when the lock clicked. She had no idea the story had just begun. The lawyer continued speaking. "Do you have access to the original deed?" "Yes." "Where?" "In a bank deposit box." Good decision. I had placed it there nearly 15 years earlier. Back then I did it for security. Now that decision was about to change everything. "You should meet me tomorrow morning," the lawyer said. "Bring the deed. And then we begin." I ended the call and sat quietly for a few minutes. The street had become darker. Inside my house, the living room lights were now glowing brightly. Through the window, I could see movement. My daughter-in-law walking across the room. She looked comfortable, relaxed. That confidence made sense. From her point of view, the situation was finished. The older parent was gone. The house was theirs. Simple. Yet one thought kept repeating in my mind. She never asked a single question about the legal ownership of that property. Not once. That arrogance would soon become very expensive. I picked up my suitcase again and walked toward the bus station nearby. There was a small hotel 2 blocks away where travelers usually stayed overnight. Nothing fancy. Just a bed and a quiet room. The receptionist looked at me with mild curiosity when I checked in. Long-term residents of quiet neighborhoods rarely arrive with suitcases late at night. But the receptionist did not ask questions. An hour later, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed staring at the ceiling. Memories of that house filled my mind. The day it was built. The day my child learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Family dinners. Birthday candles. All of those memories were now sitting behind a locked door controlled by someone who had been part of the family only a few years. Pain crept into my chest slowly. Not anger. Something deeper. Betrayal. Still, another thought kept interrupting that feeling. The law does not care about family emotions. The law only cares about documents. And the document in the bank vault carried only one name. Mine. Morning arrived quickly. I left the hotel before sunrise. The bank opened at 9. By 8:30, I was standing outside the building waiting. The cool morning air felt sharp against my skin. Inside the bank, everything moved slowly and quietly. A staff member escorted me to the secure vault area. The deposit box slid open with a metallic sound. Inside rested a thick envelope sealed years earlier. I opened it carefully. The property deed lay inside. Clean, untouched, stamped with the official registration seal. And printed clearly across the ownership line was my name. I stared at that document for several seconds. Then I placed it back into the envelope and walked out of the bank. Half an hour later, I stepped into the lawyer's office. The room smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Shelves filled with legal books lined the walls. The lawyer gestured toward a chair. "You brought the document?" I handed over the envelope. The lawyer read the deed slowly, eyes scanning every line. Then the lawyer leaned back and placed the paper on the desk. "They truly locked you out?" "Yes." "And they live inside the house right now?" "Yes." The lawyer nodded once. A small smile appeared. Not a friendly smile, a professional one. "Then they created a problem that will be very difficult to escape." "What happens next?" I asked. The lawyer opened a folder and pulled out several forms. "We file an emergency property possession claim." I watched as the lawyer began filling out the paperwork. "Once the court reviews this, the situation changes quickly." "How quickly?" The lawyer looked up. "Possibly within days." A strange feeling passed through me again. The same cold clarity I felt the night before. My daughter-in-law believed the locks protected her. My son believed I would simply disappear. Neither of them understood how serious their decision had been. Because by the time the court opened the case file attached to that deed, the people sitting inside my house would face questions they never expected. And the answers would start a battle far bigger than changing a lock. The real fight had just begun. The moment the lawsuit was filed, something shifted inside me. Until that morning, everything had felt like a family conflict. Hurt feelings, betrayal, arguments behind closed doors. Once the paperwork entered the court system, the situation became something else entirely. A legal battle. And legal battles follow only one rule. Evidence decides everything. The lawyer printed several copies of the complaint and slid one across the desk toward me. At the top of the page, my name appeared as the property owner. Under that line, another sentence stood out. Illegal removal of the lawful property holder. Seeing those words written in black ink created a strange calm in my mind. My daughter-in-law had believed she was solving a family problem. What she had actually done was create a legal disaster. The lawyer leaned back slightly and studied me. "You should prepare yourself," the lawyer said. "For what?" "They will not admit fault easily." I did not expect them to. "They may claim the house was promised to them." I almost laughed. "A promise does not change a deed." The lawyer nodded. "Correct. But people facing legal trouble often create stories." Stories. I already suspected my daughter-in-law had prepared one. She had always been skilled at shaping conversations in her favor. Friends often believed whatever she said. My son believed her more than anyone. That thought returned like a dull ache in my chest. Still, emotion had no place in the courtroom that was waiting ahead. Only proof mattered now. The lawyer continued explaining the process. "The court will review the filing and send notice to the people living in the property." My son and his wife. Yes. I imagined the moment they would receive those documents. An official envelope. A legal notice explaining the owner of the house had filed a case against them. My daughter-in-law would read every line slowly, confidence fading with each sentence. For the first time since she changed the locks, doubt would enter her mind. The lawyer placed another paper on the desk. "This is also being filed." I looked at the page. Emergency request for immediate possession review. That allows the judge to examine the ownership quickly. How quickly? Possibly within a week. The speed surprised even me. 1 week earlier, I had been living peacefully inside that house. Now a courtroom was about to decide who truly controlled it. The lawyer gathered the documents neatly. "There is one more thing." "What is it?" "If they attempted to change ownership before this incident, records will show it." My attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes people try to transfer property quietly." My mind returned to several strange moments from the past year. My daughter-in-law asking casual questions about paperwork. My son asking whether the house documents were stored somewhere safe. At the time, the questions felt harmless. Now they felt different. "You think they may have tried something earlier?" I asked. "It is possible." The lawyer opened a laptop and began searching through public property records. The room grew quiet except for the soft sound of typing. Minutes passed. Then the lawyer stopped. Eyes focused on the screen. There is something here. My chest tightened slightly. What is it? Someone attempted to submit a transfer request 3 months ago. I leaned forward. A transfer request? Yes. The lawyer rotated the screen toward me. A digital record appeared. Property transfer inquiry. Submitted but rejected due to missing authorization. My heart began beating faster. Who submitted it? I asked. The lawyer scrolled lower. A name appeared. My daughter-in-law. The date printed beside it. 3 months earlier. So she already tried, I said quietly. Yes. And the request was rejected. Because the legal owner did not approve it. Which meant one thing. She had already attempted to take the house before the locks were changed. That realization sent a wave of cold understanding through my mind. The lock change had not been a sudden decision. It had been part of a plan. A plan that failed. The lawyer closed the laptop slowly. This information strengthens your position. It shows intent. Exactly. Intent. That word carried serious weight in legal cases. It meant the actions were not accidental. They were planned. I stood and walked toward the window overlooking the street. Cars moved slowly below. People walked along sidewalks unaware that inside this quiet office a family conflict had transformed into a legal storm. My son knew about this, I said softly. The lawyer did not respond immediately. After a moment, the lawyer said something careful. Sometimes people follow others without understanding the consequences. Maybe that was true. Or maybe my son had chosen a side long before the locks changed. Either way, the situation was no longer about emotions. It was about the law. And the law had already begun turning against them. The lawyer printed the property inquiry record and added it to the case folder. This will be presented if necessary. I studied the document carefully. The attempt to transfer my house. Rejected. Failed. Hidden. My daughter-in-law had believed the system would simply approve it. When that failed, she moved to a different plan. Changing the locks. Removing me. Claiming control. That plan was about to collapse. The lawyer handed me a copy of the lawsuit papers. You should keep this. I folded the documents carefully. What happens now? We wait for the court notice to reach them. And when they receive it, the lawyer paused. They will realize the house never belonged to them. I imagined that moment clearly. My daughter-in-law opening the envelope, reading the complaint, seeing the official seal of the court, understanding the mistake she had made, then realizing something even worse. The person she locked out was the only legal owner of that property. The lawyer closed the case folder. This situation will move quickly now. I nodded slowly. As I stepped outside the office building, the afternoon sun felt brighter than before. Across the city, my house still stood quietly at the end of that street. Inside those walls, my son and his wife probably felt safe. Protected by a new lock. Protected by the belief that I had no power left. They had not seen the documents yet. They had not seen the evidence already forming against them. And they definitely had not seen the next piece of information the lawyer planned to reveal. Because the property deed contained a clause that neither of them had ever read. A clause written years earlier for protection. Once the court examined that clause, the people inside my house would face a reality far more serious than a lawsuit. They would face the possibility of losing everything. And the moment that truth reached them was getting closer by the hour. 3 days after the paperwork was filed, the first sign of movement appeared. The lawyer called early in the morning. The notice has been delivered. I sat quietly for a moment after hearing those words. Delivered. That meant someone had already knocked on the door of the house I built. Someone had handed over an official envelope carrying the authority of the court. Inside that envelope was the truth my daughter-in-law never expected to face. You think they opened it yet? I asked. They will open it soon, the lawyer replied. And once they do, they will understand the situation. The situation. That phrase barely captured what was coming. I ended the call and stepped outside the small apartment I had rented temporarily. The morning air felt sharp and cool. Across the city, inside my own house, a quiet storm was likely beginning. I imagined the scene clearly. A courier standing at the front door. My daughter-in-law answering. Her expression confident, the same way it looked the night she blocked the doorway. Then the envelope placed into her hands. A legal notice. Stamped. Official. Impossible to ignore. Inside the house, she would probably sit down at the dining table and open it slowly. At first, the language might confuse her. Legal documents always sound complicated to people who never expect to receive them. But one line would stand out immediately. Property possession claim filed by the legal owner. That sentence alone would change the entire atmosphere inside that house. Because the name listed as legal owner would not be my son. It would be mine. Later that afternoon, the lawyer called again. They contacted a lawyer. I smiled faintly. I expected that. They are trying to delay the hearing. That did not surprise me either. Delay is the first move people attempt when they realize they are standing on weak ground. Will it work? I asked. No. The answer came without hesitation. The ownership document is clear. The lawyer paused briefly before continuing. There is something else. What is it? They are claiming the house was promised to them. The story had already begun. Exactly as predicted. What kind of promise? I asked. They say you agreed to give them the house after retirement. I almost laughed again. People often believe spoken promises carry the same weight as legal records. They do not. And they have proof. I asked. No written proof. That meant the claim would collapse quickly. Still, the attempt revealed something interesting. My daughter-in-law had decided to fight. She had not admitted defeat after seeing the lawsuit. Instead, she chose to challenge it. That decision would bring consequences she had not imagined. Later that evening, I received the first message from my son. The message appeared on my phone suddenly. Why are you doing this to us? I read the sentence several times. Doing this to us. Not one word about changing the locks. Not one word about throwing me out of the house. Instead, he spoke as if I had attacked them. I typed a reply slowly. You removed the owner from the property. Several minutes passed before the next message arrived. You promised that house to us. There it was. The same story the lawyer mentioned earlier. A promise. I stared at the phone screen. A strange sadness settled in my chest. My son truly believed that story. Or maybe he wanted to believe it. Either way, the reality remained unchanged. A promise cannot replace ownership. I placed the phone on the table and did not reply again. The next morning, the lawyer called with another update. They filed a response to the court. What does it say? They claim emotional pressure forced them to change the locks. That sentence made no sense. Emotional pressure? I repeated. Yes. The lawyer sounded slightly amused. They claim you created a stressful environment in the house. For a moment, I could not decide whether to laugh or remain silent. So this was the new strategy. Turning the victim into the accused. Will the court believe that? I asked. The judge will ask one simple question. What question? Who owns the property? The answer to that question had already been written years earlier. My name. Only mine. The lawyer continued speaking. The hearing date has been scheduled. When? 4 days from now. 4 days. That meant my daughter-in-law had less than a week to maintain the illusion she had created. After that, the entire situation would move into a courtroom where facts mattered far more than personal stories. The lawyer also mentioned something interesting. The opposing lawyer requested copies of the ownership documents. That request made sense. Any responsible lawyer would want to examine the evidence before stepping into court. But once that lawyer saw the deed, the situation inside my house would change quickly. Because professional lawyers recognize weak cases immediately. And this case had one enormous weakness. My daughter-in-law had removed the legal owner from the property. The law treats that action very seriously. That evening, I took a walk through a quiet park near the apartment. Leaves moved gently across the ground. Children played near a fountain. Life around me continued normally while my family prepared for a courtroom confrontation. Part of me wondered what my son was thinking at that moment. Was he beginning to doubt the plan? Was he asking questions about the ownership documents? Or was he still trusting his wife completely? The truth would appear soon. Because once the court session began, every claim would face scrutiny. And the more I thought about the situation, the more one detail returned to my mind. The clause written inside the property deed. A clause added many years earlier for protection. Very few people ever read that section carefully. My daughter-in-law certainly never had. My son probably did not know it existed. Yet once that clause entered the courtroom discussion, the situation would shift dramatically. Because the deed did not only prove ownership, it also contained conditions. Conditions that could turn this case from a simple property dispute into something far more serious. And when the judge examined that document during the upcoming hearing, the people living inside my house would understand that the lock they installed had opened a door they could no longer close. The courtroom date was approaching, and with it came the moment when the truth would begin speaking louder than any story my daughter-in-law could invent. The morning of the hearing arrived with a strange silence. I woke before sunrise. Sleep had been shallow during the night, filled with fragments of memory from the house I built years earlier. The kitchen table where family dinners once happened. The hallway where my child learned to walk. Now those same rooms were occupied by people who believed the house belonged to them. Today the court would begin examining that belief. I dressed slowly and reviewed the folder the lawyer prepared. Inside were copies of the property deed, the bank records connected to the mortgage, and the public record showing the failed attempt to transfer ownership 3 months earlier. Every document told the same story. One owner, one name, mine. When I arrived at the courthouse, the hallway outside the courtroom was already crowded. Lawyers walked back and forth holding stacks of files. People sat on wooden benches waiting for their cases to be called. My lawyer stood near the door reviewing notes. The judge assigned to this hearing does not waste time. The lawyer said quietly. That sounds good. It means the discussion will focus on facts. Facts were exactly what I needed. A few minutes later, my son appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked tired. Behind him walked my daughter-in-law. Her posture remained confident, though I noticed tension in the way she held her shoulders. They were not alone. Another lawyer walked beside them, a tall man carrying a thick briefcase. Our eyes met briefly across the hallway. For a second, I thought my son might walk over and speak. He did not. Instead, he followed his wife toward the opposite side of the waiting area. The distance between us felt larger than the room itself. Soon the courtroom door opened. People began entering quietly. Inside the room, the atmosphere felt heavy with expectation. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Once seated, the judge looked down at the case file. This matter concerns property possession and alleged unlawful removal of the legal owner. The judge's voice carried across the room clearly. My daughter-in-law shifted slightly in her chair. The judge turned toward my lawyer. You may begin. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, the situation is simple. The individual sitting beside me purchased the property 28 years ago. The legal deed lists only one owner. Despite this, the occupants changed the locks and removed the owner from the residence. The judge nodded slowly. Do you have the ownership document? My lawyer handed the deed to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge. The courtroom remained silent as the judge read. Several long seconds passed. Then the judge spoke. The document lists the plaintiff as sole owner. Those words echoed across the room. My daughter-in-law leaned forward immediately. Her lawyer stood. Your Honor, while the deed lists the plaintiff, the occupants were promised full control of the property after retirement. The judge looked up. Is there written documentation supporting that claim? The lawyer hesitated slightly. No written agreement exists. A faint murmur moved through the courtroom benches. The judge returned attention to the deed. Without written documentation, verbal claims carry little weight against registered ownership. My daughter-in-law whispered something urgently to her lawyer. He nodded and continued. The occupants acted under emotional stress created by the plaintiff. The judge raised an eyebrow. What type of stress? They believed they were being forced out of the family home. That argument hung in the air awkwardly. My lawyer spoke again. Your Honor, the ownership document shows the property belongs to my client. The occupants cannot claim eviction from a house they do not legally own. The judge leaned back slightly. That point appears clear. For the first time, I noticed a small crack forming in my daughter-in-law's confident expression. Her lawyer quickly introduced another argument. There is also reason to question whether the plaintiff intended to transfer ownership. My lawyer responded immediately. The public record shows the opposite. The judge looked toward my lawyer. What record? My lawyer opened the folder and handed another document to the clerk. This shows an attempted property transfer submitted 3 months earlier by one of the occupants. The clerk passed the document forward. The judge read the record carefully, then looked toward my daughter-in-law. You submitted this request? Her lawyer answered before she could speak. Yes, Your Honor. It was an inquiry. The judge studied the document again. The request was rejected because the legal owner did not authorize it. Silence filled the courtroom. The meaning behind that statement became obvious to everyone present. Someone had tried to take control of the property before the locks were changed. The judge placed the paper back on the desk. This raises additional questions. My daughter-in-law's lawyer cleared his throat. It was simply a misunderstanding. The judge did not respond immediately. Instead, the judge looked directly at my daughter-in-law. Did you change the locks on the property? She hesitated. For the first time since this entire conflict began, uncertainty appeared in her voice. Yes. And the owner was prevented from entering. Another pause. Yes. The judge wrote something in the case file. The quiet scratching of the pen seemed louder than anything else in the room. Then the judge spoke again. This court will review the ownership clause contained in the deed before making a ruling. My lawyer nodded slightly. The clause. The one detail nobody inside that house had ever considered. The judge looked toward both legal teams. The hearing will continue tomorrow morning. A small wave of conversation moved through the courtroom as people began standing. My son looked at me briefly while leaving the room. His expression no longer carried the confidence I saw the night the locks were changed. Instead, it carried something closer to worry. But the most dramatic change appeared on the face of my daughter-in-law. Because her lawyer had just finished reading the section of the deed that the judge planned to examine next. And that section contained a condition neither of them had noticed before. A condition that could transform this case from a simple property dispute into something far more serious. By the time tomorrow's hearing began, the people who believed they had secured that house with a lock would realize they had triggered consequences far beyond their control. The second morning inside the courthouse felt heavier than the first. Something had changed overnight. Word spreads quickly between lawyers, and by the time I arrived, several people in the hallway were already whispering about the property clause mentioned the day before. My lawyer met me near the courtroom entrance. The opposing lawyer read the clause last night. The lawyer said quietly, and they did not expect it. I had suspected that. The clause was written years earlier during a conversation with the attorney who handled the original purchase of the house. At that time, I added it as a precaution, a small legal shield in case family disputes ever reached the property. Back then, I never imagined it would actually be used. Yet now that single paragraph inside the deed had become the most powerful part of the case. Inside the courtroom, my son and daughter-in-law were already seated. Their lawyer looked far less confident than he had the previous day. He held the property document carefully, reading certain lines again and again. When the judge entered, the room immediately grew quiet. The case resumed without delay. The judge looked toward my lawyer. You mentioned a clause within the deed that may affect the circumstances of this dispute. Yes, Your Honor. My lawyer handed the deed back to the clerk, who placed it before the judge once more. The judge turned several pages slowly, then stopped, eyes focusing on the paragraph written near the bottom of the document. Several long seconds passed. Then the judge read the clause aloud. In the event that any occupant attempts to remove or restrict access of the registered owner from the property, such action may be considered unlawful interference with property rights and may trigger immediate legal penalties, including removal of said occupants. The courtroom remained completely silent. Even the air seemed heavier. My daughter-in-law shifted in her chair. Her lawyer leaned toward her and whispered something quickly. The judge looked up again. This clause appears very direct. My lawyer nodded. It was included during the original registration. The judge turned toward the other side of the room. Counsel, how do you respond to this provision? My daughter-in-law's lawyer stood slowly. His voice sounded far more cautious than the previous day. Your Honor, the occupants believe they had the right to remain in the home. The judge raised a hand slightly. The clause does not address belief. It addresses action. The lawyer hesitated. The locks were changed, and the legal owner was denied entry? A pause. Yes. The judge wrote another note in the case file. That quiet sound of pen on paper felt like thunder inside my mind, because every sentence spoken inside this room now carried legal weight. My daughter-in-law suddenly spoke. Your Honor, we only wanted to protect our home. The judge looked at her carefully. Your home. She swallowed slightly. The house where we live. The deed states otherwise. Her lawyer quickly placed a hand on her arm, signaling her not to continue. But the damage had already begun. The judge returned attention to the clause again. This section clearly warns against removing the registered owner from the property. My lawyer spoke calmly. That is exactly what occurred. The judge looked toward my son. You reside in this property as well. My son nodded slowly. Yes. And you supported the decision to change the locks? He hesitated. For a moment, the courtroom felt frozen. Then he answered quietly. Yes. That admission hung in the air like a heavy weight, because it confirmed what the documents already suggested. The decision to remove me from the house had not been accidental. It had been deliberate. The judge leaned back slightly. This court must now consider whether the actions taken by the occupants violated the legal protection written into the deed. My daughter-in-law's lawyer stepped forward again. Your Honor, we request additional time to review the clause. The judge shook his head. The language is clear. The lawyer attempted one final argument. The occupants believed they were protecting their living situation. The judge closed the case file briefly. Belief does not override property law. Silence returned once again. For the first time since the case began, the balance of power inside the courtroom had shifted completely. I could see it on my daughter-in-law's face. The calm confidence she carried when she changed the locks had vanished. Now uncertainty filled her expression. My son looked down at the floor. Perhaps he was realizing the same thing. This situation had grown far beyond a family disagreement. The court was now examining actions that violated legal protections written directly into the property deed. The judge reopened the file. The court will examine additional evidence regarding the attempted transfer request submitted 3 months ago. That sentence caused immediate movement across the opposing table. Their lawyer whispered urgently again. The judge continued speaking. If the attempted transfer and the lock change are connected, the matter becomes significantly more serious. My lawyer nodded. We believe the evidence will show a pattern of actions aimed at taking control of the property. The judge looked toward my daughter-in-law again. Did you submit the transfer request recorded in the public property registry? She looked toward her lawyer. The lawyer nodded slowly. Yes. The judge wrote another note, then looked back at the document. This court will continue the hearing tomorrow for final review. The gavel struck lightly. The session ended. As people began leaving the courtroom, the tension remained thick in the air. My daughter-in-law remained seated for several seconds after everyone else stood. Her lawyer spoke to her quietly, explaining something while pointing toward the property clause. Across the aisle, my son glanced toward me again. This time his expression carried something new. Fear. Because the truth had begun revealing itself piece by piece. They had tried to take a house that was never theirs. They had removed the legal owner. And now the court had seen the clause that directly warned against doing exactly that. What neither of them realized yet was that the judge had only examined the first part of that clause. The second part had not been discussed. Not yet. And once the court read the final sentence written at the bottom of that paragraph, the consequences waiting for the people inside my house would become far more serious than simply losing a place to live. That night before the next hearing, I slept better than I had since the locks were changed. Not because the situation felt easy. Nothing about this fight was easy. Facing your own child across a courtroom never feels natural. Still, something inside the case had shifted. The confidence my daughter-in-law carried during the first hearing had disappeared. The moment the judge read the clause from the deed, the direction of the case began turning. Yet the most serious part of that clause had not even been mentioned inside the courtroom. Not yet. The following morning, my lawyer met me outside the courthouse again. The other side tried to negotiate last night, the lawyer said. Negotiate what? They suggested dropping the case if you allow them to remain in the house. I looked at the courthouse doors for a moment before answering. So they want to stay? Yes. They locked the owner outside, and now they want mercy. The lawyer gave a small nod. It appears that way. For a moment, I imagined returning to that house and pretending nothing had happened. Pretending the lock on the door had never changed. Pretending my own child had not stood silently while someone pushed me out of my home. That was not possible. They made their choice, I said quietly. We continue. The lawyer did not argue. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt tense. My son and daughter-in-law were already sitting at their table. Both looked exhausted. Their lawyer shuffled through several documents nervously. When the judge entered, the room settled into silence once again. The court will continue reviewing the property clause referenced during the previous hearing. The judge opened the deed slowly. Everyone inside the room watched closely, because that single paragraph had already changed the direction of the case. The judge read the earlier lines again briefly, then continued further down the page. And that was when the final sentence appeared. The sentence nobody had mentioned. Yet, the judge read it aloud. In the event that unlawful restriction of the registered owner occurs, the owner retains the right to request immediate removal of occupants and seek financial damages related to interference with lawful possession. The room went completely still. Financial damages. My daughter-in-law's lawyer sat up immediately. Your Honor, the judge raised a hand. The clause is clearly written. My lawyer stood calmly. The plaintiff intends to exercise that right. A wave of tension spread across the opposing table. My daughter-in-law leaned toward her lawyer, whispering urgently. My son stared forward without speaking. The judge looked toward them. You changed the locks. Silence. You denied the owner entry. Still silence. The judge continued. Under the terms written into the deed, that action may justify removal and financial compensation. My daughter-in-law suddenly spoke. We never meant to cause damage. The judge's expression did not change. Intent does not erase action. Her lawyer stepped forward again. Your Honor, the occupants believed they had permission to live there. The judge turned a page in the file. Permission to live somewhere does not grant ownership. The courtroom felt heavy with pressure, because everyone now understood what the final sentence of that clause meant. This case was no longer just about who owned the house. It was about what happened after the owner was locked out. My lawyer handed another document to the clerk. This record shows the plaintiff was forced to secure temporary housing after being removed from the property. The judge examined the document carefully. Hotel receipts. Apartment rental agreement. Every cost created by the lock change. The judge looked toward my daughter-in-law again. These expenses were created by your decision. Her voice trembled slightly. We thought the house belonged to us. The judge spoke calmly. The deed proves otherwise. The opposing lawyer attempted another argument. The occupants have lived there for years. The judge responded quickly. Residence does not equal ownership. Each answer pushed the case further away from them. My son finally spoke for the first time that morning. We did not think it would go this far. His voice sounded quiet and strained. The judge looked directly at him. Property disputes often reach this point when actions violate legal ownership. The room fell silent again, because there was nothing left to argue. The documents were clear. The clause was clear. The actions taken inside that house were clear. My daughter-in-law had believed changing the locks ended the story. Instead, it had started a legal process she could not control anymore. The judge closed the case file slowly. This court will review the full record before issuing a ruling. The gavel struck. The hearing ended. As people began leaving the courtroom, my son remained seated for a moment. His shoulders looked heavier than before. My daughter-in-law avoided looking in my direction entirely. Their lawyer spoke quietly to them, explaining something with careful gestures. Across the aisle, my lawyer gathered the documents calmly. Outside, the courtroom hallway filled with quiet conversations. Some people glanced toward me. Courtrooms attract attention when family disputes become public. But my focus stayed on one thought. The ruling was coming soon. And once the judge delivered that decision, everything would change. Not just the ownership of the house, the entire future of the people who try to take it. Because the clause inside that deed had already revealed its first consequence. Removal from the property. Yet the court had not discussed the final legal option attached to that clause. Not fully. And once the judge addressed that last possibility during the final hearing, the people who believed they were protecting their home would realize they had placed themselves in a far more dangerous position than they ever imagined. The final hearing arrived sooner than anyone expected. Only 2 days had passed since the judge examined the clause inside the deed, yet the entire situation already felt different. When I entered the courthouse that morning, I noticed something unusual. My son and daughter-in-law were already standing near their lawyer, speaking in low voices. Their confidence was gone. Even from across the hallway, I could see it clearly. The same people who once stood at my door and told me I was no longer welcome now looked as though the ground beneath them had begun to shift. My lawyer walked beside me quietly. They tried another request late last night, the lawyer said. What kind of request? They asked the court to settle the case privately. I stopped walking for a moment. And the judge declined. That meant the decision would arrive in open court. No quiet agreement. No hidden resolution. Everything would be decided publicly. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy with tension. Every seat along the back wall was filled. Property cases rarely attract attention, yet something about this dispute had drawn interest. Perhaps it was the strange situation. A family locking the legal owner out of their own house. The judge entered, and the room rose to its feet. Once seated, the judge opened the case file slowly. This court has reviewed the ownership documents, the attempted property transfer, and the clause included within the deed. My daughter-in-law lowered her gaze toward the table. The judge continued. The evidence shows that the plaintiff remains the sole legal owner of the property. That statement echoed through the room. Clear, direct. My son closed his eyes briefly, but the judge had not finished. The occupants changed the locks and prevented the owner from entering the property. A pause followed. Then the judge looked toward the opposing side. Do you dispute that action? Their lawyer stood. No, Your Honor. Those 3 words ended any remaining doubt. The judge nodded once. Because the action is admitted, the court must determine the appropriate response. My lawyer stood calmly. We request immediate restoration of property access and removal of the occupants. The opposing lawyer rose quickly. Your Honor, the occupants request time to relocate. The judge studied the file again. How long? Several weeks. My daughter-in-law looked hopeful for a moment. But the judge spoke again before that hope could grow. The clause written into the deed allows immediate removal. The hope vanished from her face instantly. Silence filled the courtroom, because everyone understood what those words meant. The court now had authority to order them out of the house. Immediately, the judge leaned forward slightly. However, the court will also examine whether the attempted property transfer indicates deliberate effort to take ownership without consent. The opposing lawyer stepped forward again. It was only an inquiry. The judge lifted the document containing the registry record. The form submitted was not a question. It was a transfer request. The lawyer did not respond. The judge placed the paper back on the desk. Combined with the lock change, this action suggests a pattern. A pattern. The room seemed to tighten around those words. My daughter-in-law whispered something to her lawyer urgently, but the judge continued speaking. The court must protect legal ownership when such patterns appear. My lawyer presented another document. This statement confirms the plaintiff was forced to secure temporary housing after the lock change. The judge examined it briefly. The financial impact is documented. My son suddenly spoke. We never wanted this situation. His voice sounded strained. The judge looked toward him. Yet the decision to remove the owner was made. He lowered his head. Across the table, my daughter-in-law sat completely still. The confidence she once carried had been replaced by something else entirely. Fear. The judge closed the case file slowly. This court will now issue its decision. The room fell silent. Even the faint sound of movement in the hallway outside seemed to disappear. Because everyone inside the courtroom understood the next few sentences would decide everything. The judge spoke clearly. The plaintiff is confirmed as the sole legal owner of the property. My chest tightened slightly. Though the truth had always been clear, hearing it spoken inside the courtroom carried weight. The judge continued. The occupants are ordered to vacate the property. My daughter-in-law looked up suddenly. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm. The judge finished the sentence. Within 72 hours. A quiet gasp moved through the benches behind us. 72 hours. 3 days. After everything that had happened, they now had 3 days to leave the house they believed they controlled. The judge added one more statement. The court also recognizes the financial impact caused by the unlawful lock change. My lawyer stood. We request damages as permitted by the deed clause. The judge nodded slowly. The court will review the documented expenses. My daughter-in-law finally spoke again. Your Honor, please. The judge raised a hand. The ruling stands. The gavel struck. The sound echoed sharply across the room. Just like that, it was finished. The case that began with a changed lock had ended with a court order. My son remained seated long after everyone began leaving. My daughter-in-law stared at the table without speaking. Their lawyer quietly explained the situation. 3 days. That was all the time they had left inside the house they believed belonged to them. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with quiet conversation. My lawyer closed the case folder calmly. The court confirmed ownership, the lawyer said. Yes. But my thoughts were already moving beyond that moment. Because while the court had ordered them to leave the house, one final decision still remained. The house was still mine. The future of that property had not yet been decided. And the choice I was about to make would shock them far more than the court ruling itself. Next, Chapter 9. The decision they never expected. Word count. 1,203 days passed quickly. Faster than anyone expected. The court order had been delivered the same afternoon as the ruling. An official document placed directly into the hands of the people who had once believed they controlled the house. 72 hours. That was the time given to them. 3 days to leave the place where they thought their future was secure. During those days, I did not visit the house. Not once. Some people asked why. My lawyer even suggested that I could legally return immediately. But I chose not to. Not yet. Because something inside me had already begun shifting. Winning the case had answered the legal question. The house belonged to me. The court confirmed it. But another question remained. What should happen next? On the morning of the fourth day, my lawyer called. The court officer confirmed the property is now vacant. Vacant. The word sounded strange. For weeks, that house had been the center of a storm. Arguments. Court filings. Hearings. Now it stood empty again. Just walls. Just rooms. Just silence. Would you like to go there today? The lawyer asked. Yes. The drive back to that street felt longer than usual. When I turned the corner and saw the house again, the same porch light was still hanging near the door. The same driveway. The same garden I planted years earlier. But the feeling had changed. The house no longer looked like the place where my family once lived. Now it looked like the scene of a long battle. The front door stood closed. This time the key turned easily in the lock. When the door opened, a wave of quiet air moved through the hallway. Inside, the rooms looked different. Furniture was gone. Pictures were gone. Many things had been taken. Yet some details remained. The mark on the wall where the bookshelf once stood. The faint outline of a picture frame near the staircase. Memories lived in those empty spaces. I walked slowly through the living room. Every step carried echoes from years earlier. Laughter, arguments, family dinners. Now all of that felt distant. Near the kitchen window I stopped. The backyard looked exactly the same. Sunlight touched the grass gently. For a moment, I wondered whether the house could ever feel like home again. Then another thought appeared. Maybe the house did not need to remain part of my life anymore. Winning the court case had restored ownership. But ownership does not always mean attachment. Later that afternoon, I sat with my lawyer once more. The court will soon review the damages request, the lawyer explained. The expenses caused by the lock change. I nodded, but my attention was already moving somewhere else. There is another option, I said. The lawyer looked up. What option? I want to sell the house. The lawyer raised an eyebrow slightly. You just fought a legal battle to recover it. Yes. And now you want to sell? I looked out the office window for several seconds before answering. Some places hold too many memories. The lawyer understood immediately. That decision is entirely yours. Selling the house would close the final chapter of this entire conflict. It would also create something my son and daughter-in-law had never imagined. Because they believed the house represented stability, a future, a place they could control. But once the property was sold, that future would disappear. Later that evening, I received another message from my son. The first message since the court ruling. Where will we go now? The words looked smaller on the screen than I expected. A part of me wanted to answer with anger. Another part felt something else entirely. Sadness. Not for the house. For the relationship that had broken along the way. I typed slowly. You made your choices. Several minutes passed. Another message arrived. We never thought it would end like this. I read that sentence carefully. Neither did I. But some actions carry consequences that cannot be undone. The next morning, I contacted a property agent. Within hours, the house was listed for sale. The response came quickly. The location was desirable. Several buyers showed interest almost immediately. Standing outside the property one final time, I watched as potential buyers walked through the front door. They examined the rooms. They discussed renovation ideas. They imagined new lives inside those walls. To them, the house represented opportunity, a fresh beginning. For me, it represented something different. Closure. Because the conflict that began with a changed lock had already reshaped everything connected to that place. The house was never the real issue. Trust was. And once trust breaks inside a family, rebuilding it becomes far harder than winning any legal case. Within 2 weeks, the property received a strong offer. The paperwork moved quickly. Soon the house would belong to someone else entirely. My son and daughter-in-law probably never imagined that outcome when they stood inside the doorway and told me I was no longer welcome. They believed they were securing their future. Instead, they had erased it. Yet one final conversation still remained, because the closing of the sale would bring a moment neither of them expected. A moment when they would realize that losing the house was not the only consequence waiting for them. Something else was about to change. And that final decision would bring the entire story to its true ending. Next, Chapter 10, The Last Move. Word count. 1200. The sale of the house moved faster than I expected. Within 14 days, the paperwork was complete. The buyers were a young couple searching for their first home. They walked through the empty rooms with excitement that reminded me of the day I first stepped inside that house many years earlier. Back then, the walls were bare. The floors still smelled of fresh wood. Life felt wide open. Standing in that same living room now, I realized how many years had passed between those two moments. The buyers asked simple questions. How old was the roof? When were the windows replaced? Had the garden been maintained recently? I answered calmly. Every response felt like closing another small chapter of my past. By the time the final documents were signed, the house no longer belonged to me. And strangely, I felt lighter. The property had once been the center of my life. Later, it became the center of a conflict that nearly destroyed my family. Now it was simply a building owned by someone else. The legal battle was finished. The house was gone. Yet one matter still remained unresolved. 2 days after the closing, my son asked to meet. The message arrived late in the evening. Can we talk? I looked at the screen for several minutes before answering. Eventually, I agreed. We met in a quiet park across the city. The same park where people walked their dogs and children played near the small fountain. When my son arrived, he looked older than I remembered. Not older in years. Older in expression. The type of look people carry after learning painful lessons. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. The house is sold. Yes. I heard about it yesterday. His voice carried disappointment. Maybe even disbelief. I never thought you would sell it. I watched the water moving slowly through the fountain. The house was never the real problem. He lowered his gaze. I know. A long pause followed. Then he asked something that revealed the question he had been holding since the court case ended. What happens now? The answer was simple. You move forward. And us. That word carried more weight than he probably intended. Us. I looked at him carefully. You made your decisions. I regret them. His voice sounded honest. But regret often arrives after the damage is already done. I warned you many times, I said quietly. I know. Yet you still chose her plan. He did not argue. Because the truth was already clear. The night the locks were changed had been the moment everything shifted. From that moment forward, every action carried consequences. I never expected the court to rule that way, he admitted. The court followed the law. Another silence passed between us. Around us, people continued walking through the park without noticing the quiet tension sitting on that bench. Then my son asked the question that had been hiding beneath everything else. Will you forgive me? Forgiveness. A powerful word. Yet forgiveness does not erase memory. It does not rebuild trust instantly. It simply opens a door that was once closed. I will move forward, I said. He nodded slowly. I understand. That answer seemed enough for him. Because sometimes the possibility of future peace matters more than immediate resolution. Before leaving, he asked one more question. Where will you live now? I smiled slightly. I already found a place. The apartment overlooked a quiet river on the other side of the city. Smaller than the old house. Quieter, but peaceful. For the first time in months, my life felt calm again. No court hearings. No legal documents. No locked doors. Just a simple routine. A fresh start. And that was something my daughter-in-law never understood when she changed the locks on my house. She believed she was removing me from my own life. Instead, she forced me to create a new one. A better one. Because sometimes losing a place leads to finding something far more valuable. Freedom. Time passed. The conflict slowly faded into memory. Yet the lesson remained clear. Greed can push people to make decisions they believe will secure their future. But those same decisions often destroy the very foundation they stand on. My daughter-in-law thought the house represented power, control, security. In the end, it became the reason everything collapsed. And as for me, the person they once believed was powerless, life continued in a way they never expected. Peacefully, on my own terms. Because the day they changed the locks on my house was the day they accidentally opened a door that led me somewhere far better. Underscore 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 if you want. I can also create a very strong YouTube outro, 40 to 60 seconds, that will increase viewer retention and subscriptions for this story video. Next below is the YouTube outro, about 120 to 150 words, designed for faceless storytelling channels to increase watch time, engagement, and subscriptions. OUTRO. The lesson behind the story word count. 140. Some people believe power comes from control. A bigger house, a stronger position, the ability to push someone aside. But this story proves something very different. The moment greed replaces respect. Inside a family, everything begins to collapse. One decision, one lock on a door, one act of betrayal, and suddenly the people who thought they were winning find themselves standing in a courtroom watching their future disappear. What would you have done in this situation? Would you forgive your family after something like this? Or would you walk away and start a new life? Write your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about family betrayal, legal battles, and shocking twists, make sure you subscribe and watch the next story on your screen, because the next one might be even more unbelievable than this.